Let me get straight to the point. The Mission Impossible series is the biggest box office anomaly in Hollywood history for all the wrong reasons. When you think about the most recognizable and significant film IPs of the 21st century, one name stands out for being unique and constantly reinventing itself time and time again. A franchise that has learned to adapt and evolve over time to keep itself out of a creative slump and make sure the audiences get the most bang for their buck while going to the cinemas. Starting from all the way back in 1996, when the pilot film released simply named Mission Impossible, where we first laid eyes on a character who'd become a crucial part of pop culture for decades to come. The film was a decent action thriller with groundbreaking stunt work and okayish visual effects with a convoluted yet fairly generic story. But it had enough star power with big names like Tom Cruise and Jon Voight attached to it. It catapulted the film to insane heights. The film broke numerous box office records and exceeded all expectations and raked in an insane $457 million, which would amount to $900 million plus when adjusted for inflation. And a new cinematic juggernaut was born, which coincidentally was also the first time Cruise tried his hand at being a producer. But this was almost 30 years ago. Which seems weird to even say out loud, but the industry back in the day wasn't driven by brainless greed as it is now. And Tom has always had a very high IQ for all things cinema, which meant, although a sequel is immediately greenlit, Cruise took his own sweet time to choose the right script and director for MI2. And almost exactly 4 years later, Mission Impossible 2 hit the screens, and guess what? It was just Mission Impossible but on steroids. Because every aspect of the previous installment was dialed up to 11. More action, more death-defying stunts, its theme which is one of the most discernible in Hollywood history, higher stakes, more masks, with a story that still remained generic and cookie-cutter. It was still the age-old good guy saves the day tale, but people were still loving this shit. Because the second part outdid the first and raked in a monumental $546 million, which was $100 million more than the first. The franchise began to be associated with stylized action, and it started to be loved by fans of non-CGI based hyper-realistic stunt work, which is a marquee symbol of the franchise to this day. But it seemed like casual fans had had enough of it, with a sort of a fatigue kicking in for style over substance kind of films. The approach they were taking desperately needed to change, and 6 years later, the third installment was released. Make no mistake about it, it was still very much the Mission Impossible of the old, but for the first time in its decade-long existence, the film finally showed some heart. You see, until that point, Mission Impossible was all and only about saving the day. Ethan Hunt didn't really feel like a real person because of a complete lack of any long-term and significant interpersonal relationships among the characters. He just felt like a machine driven by a seemingly impossible mission. But suddenly in MI3, Ethan was a full-blown family man. He had a wife, had friends and peers who respected and loved him, and a deeply personal stake in the story along with having to save the world. In simple terms, Ethan Hunt was humanized. And although critics and hardcore fans of the series welcomed the improvements with open arms, the more casual fans didn't seem to care about the franchise. It still made nearly $400 million but never soared to expected heights. But it wasn't just a Mission Impossible fatigue, because Cruise at the time had started to seem like an unstable person, to put it mildly. A handful of really weird interviews and a highly controversial association with the Church of Scientology had turned people against Cruise. Add to that the fact that some massive films released right along with MI3, and what we got is a significant drop in box office numbers. So after that not so profitable outing, Cruise took half a decade off from the franchise. Not only did he have to seriously reinvent his public image, he also had to break away from the perception of being just an action star who had steered away from being an actual actor, which he well and truly did with unforgettable roles like Les Grossman in Tropic Thunder and his anti-Nazi role of Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg in Valkyrie. Not only did he give his action persona a break before audiences were saturated, he also started being more sane and level-headed during public appearances. And then came the game changer for the franchise in the form of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which was without a doubt the film that completely changed audience perception towards the series and established it as a thought-provoking, heartfelt spy action thriller series which had just as much soul in it as it had spectacle. Because after the release of this film, the franchise just kept rising higher and higher. Mission Impossible 4 regarded as a major improvement over its predecessors, and a plot that would rival the finest in Hollywood, which earned a whopping $694 million. Then came Rogue Nation with universal acclaim, basically the same as Ghost Protocol, which earned 710 million, and MI Fallout, which has been regarded as one of the best action movies ever made, and rightfully so. Not only does it have a fantastic cast headed by Tom Cruise and Henry Cavill, along with breathtaking action set pieces, it also boasts of the single best story in the series. It sort of concluded the trilogy, which started with Ghost Protocol, and tied up any loose ends in the story so perfectly it felt like the cinematic climax of a lifetime. And the film also turned out to be the highest grossing Mission Impossible movie of all time, bringing home a massive $791 million against a production budget of $180 million. But as strange and as counterintuitive as it seems, Tom Cruise, one of the biggest box office draws in history, had never touched the coveted billion-dollar mark at the box office in his 4-decade-long career. And after the pandemic hit, Cruise up and disappeared. He was MIA for 4 whole years, but then again, it only made sense. Because you see, Tom Cruise was never and will never be a TV guy. He'll always be an advocate and a pioneer of the big screen experience. And that's exactly what he fought tooth and nail for by exercising his sheer star power and withholding Paramount from releasing Top Gun Maverick on OTT. Which then turned out to be a brilliant and extremely profitable move because the film turned out to be his highest grossing outing of all time. Because it made $1.496 billion, a hair's breadth away from $1.5 billion mark. NANI? Right. But the film well and truly became the climax of Cruise's illustrious career. He was at the top of the world, was being called the man who saved cinema by juggernauts of the industry, and at the horizon stood another guaranteed billion-dollar film for Tom Cruise in the form of Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. The first part of the grand finale for Ethan Hunt's character, or so they said initially. But you know that old saying about how life throws a curveball when you least expect it? That's exactly what happened. Even though the graph showed Cruise to absolutely hit it out of the park once again, Dead Reckoning failed. Not miserably by any stretch of the imagination, but it barely broke even, and some reports suggest that there might even have been some losses. It wasn't bad, it wasn't subpar, it was a solid film, with rave reviews and really good word of mouth. And to add insult to injury, Final Reckoning tanked even harder, with the film falling roughly $300 million short of the break-even point, despite once again being a really good film. But how did this happen? How did the biggest star in Hollywood fail to deliver at the absolute peak of his career? Mission Impossible has been one of the few films that is tailor-made for the big screens, because the sheer shock value and presentation are so extravagant, it just demands a theater experience. And despite building insane momentum, the 2-part series failed because of 3 main reasons. The first is the franchise fatigue in Hollywood, which I've already made a video about, where I dive deep into the topic, which will explain it better than I could right now, so go watch that. The second reason was the insanely high budget of the film, which didn't really translate on screen. The combined production budget for Dead and Final Reckoning was a stupid $650 to $700 million, which then becomes $1 billion when you add marketing costs. The typical bloated Hollywood budget that does not seem to make sense in any way. And this skyrocketing cost wasn't even seen in the actual film. Yeah, the base jump and final plane stunt were good, but did it even come close to Burj Khalifa or the Halo jump? Not really. And these 2 stunts alone couldn't possibly justify a $300 million increase in the budget. Come on. And apart from these 2 set pieces, what else was even there? Even if you count the submarine scene in, which was subpar, at best, it doesn't make any sense financially. Hollywood needs to understand that as soon as they make the break-even point for a film $1 billion, they are instantly setting themselves up for failure. And the third reason is lying about giving the character of Ethan Hunt a fitting send-off. Well, I won't ever forget that that's what they said initially. As much as I love the films, even I gotta admit that Ethan just needs to die while saving the world. Because if the good guy is practically unbeatable, what's the point even? Marketing the 2 films to be a send-off for the character, and then failing to deliver on the promise because of greed was the final reckoning for the franchise. Because as it seems, nobody wants to see another Mission Impossible film other than Tom Cruise himself, because honestly, it doesn't make sense to continue anymore. Once again, they tried to milk the cow for every last droplet and ended up killing it instead. Some people might say that it lost value because of too many films, or that it seems too over the top. Both things I don't agree with. I've even heard some speculate that Tom Cruise has lost his star power, which is a topic for another time. But I don't really see that as the case either. Over the top is the way to go in films, and Mission Impossible had stood the test of time until they decided to get greedy. But for what it's worth, the film has already delivered gold. And if you haven't seen it in the theaters, boy, are you missing out. I mean, are you really a true fan of cinema if you haven't seen Ethan Hunt run up and down the Burj Khalifa on IMAX, which admittedly is one of the best action sequences in film history? And it's not even a one and done type of situation, because the spectacle value along with top-notch storytelling has been a part of the series for almost 3 decades now. It's the first franchise to never ever release a bad film in the entirety of its existence or delve into unnecessary expansion, which I'll always respect. Also, I think it's time we realize we aren't going to see another Mission Impossible film with Cruise in the leading role, because he might still move like he's 30, but age definitely seems to have caught up to Tom. He's like 63 for crying out loud. And an inevitable reboot will happen sometime in the future, and even though the Mission Impossible series looks like it's come to a screeching halt, one fact remains: that there will never ever be another Tom Cruise. That's it for today, people. I'm gonna go eat a chicken Caesar salad.